did we learn this when we were in junior high or sixth grade with the first two rows or church? I'm not really sure, but anyway, so thank you all for coming. Welcome to, this is our 14th year for the Hale Speaker Series, which is amazing. And Joanne Rajoppi is our second speaker for the year, so we're very excited for that. Now, I decided to read a little bit about Joanne before I gave her a call to talk with her about my introduction. And I told her that when I hung up the phone, I needed to take a nap. She has done, now the politics part, of course, you might know, and you'll hear a little more about, but for education, she went on for master's, so she didn't finish just high school and go on from there. She did significant education. She was an adjunct lecturer at Rutgers for 18 years. Now, don't let the adjunct part fool you, because an adjunct is just an underpaid professor. They have to do everything a professor does. So she did that. She wrote books. She, of course, family person. She also has done a lot with professional organizations and as a volunteer for just nonprofits that do good things out in the world. So now the politics part, she's been in politics from the beginning of time and in really every area, so local, county, state, and national. So today Joanne is going to talk about women in politics, getting there and staying there. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Barbara, and good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to be here tonight, and I'm very pleased to see all of you. I wondered if anyone was going to show up. When I was first asked to do this, I thought my topic would deal with history because I'm an historian, but then I thought maybe government because I'm the county clerk, and I was rather surprised when Linnea asked me to talk about a book I wrote 30 years ago. I said, what relevance can a book I wrote about women have now that I wrote 30 years ago? But in fact, it has a lot of relevance. And the book is Women in Office, as Barb said, Getting There and Staying There. I wrote it as a basic primer for women who were thinking about entering politics or for those that were new to politics. At the time I wrote the book, of course, there were very few women involved. From my own experience, I was the first in a lot of positions. I was the first woman councilman in my town. I was the first woman mayor in my town. I was the first woman freeholder director, the first woman assistant New Jersey Secretary of State, the first woman register of deeds, and the first woman county clerk. And so my goal in writing the book was to prepare women for entry into politics, provide some basic guidance, and hopefully gain some company in office with other women. So 30 years later, I would like to say the book is not needed, but it definitely is needed. The challenges I described back then are still evident now, although they may not be as blatant. There still exists challenges that retard women's entry and promotion in politics. So let me just mention this, some statistics for you. There are 167 million women in America. Since 2013, about 51% of the population are made up of women. Some 46% of them head their own households. 74% of them are registered to vote. Now, in 1993, when I wrote the book, there were 6 women holding seats in the U.S. Senate out of 100. Pretty bad. Today, women hold 25 or 1/4 of those seats. Some growth in 30 years, but certainly not representative of the population. In 1993, 47 of the 435 House seats were held by women. Today, it's 125 or 28%. Again, not an equitable number reflective of the population. Now, on the municipal level, where most women enter into politics, the percentages are a little better. New Jersey ranks 27th in the nation, with 30% of offices held by women in very small towns with less than 10,000 people. In towns with 30,000 people, like Westfield, they hold 32% of the offices. Now, several women in Westfield had held council positions, I know, they still do, but it wasn't until Shelley Brindle ran for mayor in 2017 that a woman actually became mayor in Westfield. And I know Shelley won re-election in 2021. So local office-like positions on the school board are incubators for women who want to run for higher office. It's their introduction on how government works on the local level, dealing with neighborhood issues, which provides experience and understanding that often translates to higher office. There are exceptions, like our mayor. Some women jumpstart into politics from other fields. Shelley's was as an executive in business. Christine Todd Women went from president of the State Board of Public Utilities to run unsuccessfully at first for U.S. Senate and then for governor, which she won. So why are women so slow to gain growth in politics? What challenges do they face? Does the double standard still exist? Why is it important for women even to be represented in government? And are there advantages to being a woman in politics? I was blessed with stupidity when I entered politics. I had never encountered a systematic barrier known as the double standard prior to that. I was brought up in a family that believed there was no intellectual difference between men and women, although society certainly did its best to promote a stereotypical ideal of a woman as a wife, a mother, and a housewife that was perpetuated on TV sitcoms and advertisements in the 50s and 60s when I grew up. I had attended a girls' private high school where girls could excel without the concern of competing against boys. Research has found that all girls' high schools produce students who are more positive about academics in general, have higher educational aspirations, and have less stereotypical views about the role of women in the workplace. We also know from research that women's colleges, that their graduates are more likely to become women of achievement, especially in non-traditional roles. Now, my mother had lived and worked prior to her marriage as an independent person starting when she was 16. My first-generation Italian father encouraged my older sister to enter the male-dominated field of law in the early 1960s and supported my decision in the 70s to be a journalist in another male-centered field. So given my experience and background, I was primed to believe that women could be political actors, the same as men. I was ill-prepared to deal with the bias and discrimination I encountered. So let's begin with the double standard. There's a well-known verse about the double standard that goes like this: a working man is dynamic, a working woman is aggressive. A working man is good on details, a woman is picky. He loses his temper, she's pushy. He's confident, she's stuck up. He stands firm, she's hard as nails. He has the courage of his convictions, she's stubborn. He's a man of the world, she's been around. And on and on and on. The bias here is clear by the choice of words used for women with the same characteristics as men. The bias, by the way, is not all one-sided. Women can also be very critical judges of other women. In 1979, I ran for the state senate, the only campaign I ever lost, by the way, and made a strategic error of campaigning outside a grocery store. I had a one-year-old child at home at the time, and most people knew that. More than one woman stopped me that day to share their belief that I should be home, not campaigning for office. Now, 16 years later, in 1995, my friend Carol Cohen had a similar experience when she was screened for the position of freeholder. One of the chairmen asked her what she planned to do with her 2 children. It's doubtful the male candidates were asked the same question. Today, hopefully, that attitude is somewhat rarer, at least among women, most of whom are in the workplace and most of whom have small children. But some women persist in general in being very critical of other women. the way they dress, their weight, how their hair is styled, their shoes, and on and on. They have not yet learned the basic lesson men have learned. Stick together no matter what. Whether I agree with you or not, whether I think you're right or wrong, you're my brother and I support you. Or in this case, my sister and I support you. Now, one of the predominant reasons women have not advanced in the political arena in the past 30 years, I believe, is due to the political party hierarchy that controls the nomination process for candidates. These high positions are chairmanships in national, state, county, and local political parties, and mostly they're controlled by men. In New Jersey, for example, we have 21 counties. We have a Democratic and Republican chair in each county. That equals 42. Out of that number of 42, only 10 are women. 6 of the 10 are in counties that are controlled by the opposite party. So these women's chairs' power and influences is limited in changing the paradigm. Excuse me. As for party state chairs, there have been a total of 4 women, 2 from each party in the last 143 years. County and local political chairs seek and solicit candidates for office, and for the most part, these positions are given to men, not women, as we can tell from the statistics. There are some trends, however, that demonstrate people of color and diverse ethnic backgrounds, a few of whom are women, are given more consideration. But with this exception, the statistics are otherwise deplorable. Another important factor for women is money. Money is fuel for the engine that drives politics. Women candidates, like men, must produce money to run for office to assist the party with literature, direct mailings, and media. Unless you have a network of contributors, family, friends, organizations, and are willing to ask for money from strangers, and not an easy ask, you will not be able to run. Men are more often seen as good fundraisers than women, although that is also changing. It takes a lot of money to run for office, and due to New Jersey's strategic location between 2 major media areas, New York and Philadelphia, it costs even more money to advertise. In 1993, I, along with several other women, formed an organization called Pam's List. PAM stands for Power and Money. The organization is still going strong after 30 years, and we raise money for Democratic women candidates for state office. Recently, we expanded our support to include mayors because we see that position as one of growing influence in the state. These help groups are important to women's success and represent, for the most part, women supporting other women. There's also several national organizations that raise money specifically for women on both sides of the aisle. And of course, every large state and national organization from the NRA to the AMA have political action committees which contribute to candidates who mirror their goals. Now, one of the most important, if not the most critical aspect for women who run for office is a base of support. I can tell you from my experience, if I didn't have a base of support, I'd be in big trouble. It's quite simply you're following people you know and who know you and who support you. Not necessarily give you money, but they support you. That includes organizations, clubs, school-related organizations, organizations your children belong to, your spouse belong to. Very important. Every time a candidate in an office is reelected to that position, they generally garner an even larger base of support. That's why it's usually difficult to upset an incumbent for office. Now, there's one exception to a strong base of support, and I bet you can guess what it is. It's money. Lots and lots and lots of money. John Corzine told us this. When he ran for the Senate in 2000, he was a complete unknown in the world of politics, with no name recognition and no base of support. But he did have such personal wealth that he was able to financially contribute to the National Democratic Committee, the New Jersey Democratic Committee, and every Democratic county chairman in the state to provide support for their candidates and therefore garnered the chair's support and influence in gaining the nomination for the Senate, and, once nominated, the election. He spent $60 million to his opponent Bob Frank's $6 million in that election, and that was an unheard of amount of money at the time. So often women may have a smaller, even non-existent base of support. Traditionally, women are often asked to run in non-winnable districts or jurisdictions, basically becoming a sacrificial lamb. So why would you run if the odds for winning are against you? There are lots of reasons. You could gain name recognition for a future run, or there may be offers for other positions when you lose, or to demonstrate your willingness to help your party, and of course, eventually run for a winnable office. Recently, a woman I know ran for an unwinnable office in the state. She lost. She knew she was going to lose, but she parlayed the loss a year later by working for another candidate who was going to win. She became that person's chief of staff, and a few years later, she exchanged that job for a very lucrative lobbying position. So sometimes women are able to turn lemons into lemonade by creative strategizing. Now, when I ran for the school board in the 70s, I tried to do that. I was single with no children and seemingly no probable interest in schools. So I had to turn that around. I turned it around by my experience. I had worked as a journalist for the Newark Evening News, covering local government and schools in the district. So I was very familiar with the issues. And by the way, I was the only woman reporter in the Union County Bureau office working alongside 10 men, but that's a story for another day. As a reporter, I was trained to unearth facts, analyze them, and objectively report. I promoted that aspect of my background as an objective and fair voice to the board, and I won. So from my experience, I do believe women are particularly adept at turning no-win situations into positive ones. As we know, many women deal routinely with children and balance, somewhat deftly, changing children's negative wants into politics. Politics is like that too. In addition to the political hierarchy dominated by men, I believe women are generally not trusted. Remember Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own? His character said, "There's no crying in baseball. Likewise, there's no crying in politics, even if you want to." Some people believe women are not suited to the political arena because, quote, they become emotional. Unfortunately, that attitude exists today. Women in business are familiar with it too. It's unfair, but women are still must prove themselves, and in general, that's not too difficult because women usually work harder than men in this area. They need to prove themselves, and they know that. They familiarize themselves with the issues totally. They act professionally and project a caring and friendly demeanor. Yet in some fields, like politics, women are both undervalued and underestimated. Developing a thick skin, learning to strategize and play the long game are all key to success. So is supporting other women. Mentoring other women is to everyone's advantage. You are assisting another woman to succeed in a difficult field, you are gaining a colleague, and eventually creating a powerful support network for each other. Another wonderful resource we have right in our backyard is CAWP, the Center for American Women in Politics at Eagleton Institute at Rutgers in New Brunswick. They began as a research and data collection program for women on the national, state, and local level, but they developed into education and outreach programs, and they translated those research findings into action and addressing women's underrepresentation. They run a program called Ready to Run. It is a nonpartisan campaign training program to encourage not only women to run for office, but to position themselves for a point of office or to work in a campaign. They have a second program they sponsor, which is equally important. It's called Teach a Girl to Lead. This program is designed for educators and youth, serving organizations as well as parents to make women's public leadership visible to girls and boys, K through 12, and to offer inspiration. So are there advantages to being a woman in politics? Many men shine in organizational skills, but I think women often outshine them in the ability to organize not only things, but people. Good interpersonal skills are key in politics. So is attention to courtesy and civility. One of the unfortunate practices in politics is name-calling and other unsavory tactics. It's nothing new. Frontiersman Davy Crockett was fond of circulating the rumor that Martin Van Buren dressed in women's corsets. But name-calling and other tactics have become more normalized. Because women are still the exception in the political world, they tend to be an attractive magnet for unsavory rumors or gossips. So I will share with you one recent experience I had. Every year in my job, I design, write, and produce an election calendar. And I take a theme. Sometimes it's county parks. In 2020, it was the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment and women in the county. It's free to constituents, and it's not only for candidates, but it's for anyone who's interested in elections and deadlines and dates. My name is on it. My office information is on it. Well, a local newspaper columnist who writes a column every now and then did one called The Calendar Girl, referring to me. Throughout the column, he referred to me as the Calendar Girl, which I thought was condescending and demeaning choice of words on several levels. The word girl, of course, when speaking about a mature woman, and the term Calendar Girl reminiscent of posters and pinups. The point of his column was to berate me for using taxpayers' money to design and publish a calendar. So I had some options. I could ignore it, although I got a lot of telephone calls from people that were upset. I could publicly or personally respond, or I could have other people respond. Now, this particular columnist I discovered had recently been appointed to a lucrative, well-paying part-time position in town government. So I went to his town chairman, who was responsible for his appointment, and pointed out the harm such an attack on another public figure could incur, reflecting on the chairman's choice of appointment. I also pointed out that many women felt the column was depreciating women by its references. I can only tell you that the bottom line was that I know a conversation took place between the chairman and the columnists, and such crass terms had not been used by the columnists again. But being criticized is part of being involved in the public sector. Being demeaned because of your gender or how you identify should never be allowed. Most men do not believe it's fair play to denigrate another person, including women, but it happens more and more frequently. And I always urge women to fight back in a constructive way. Such practices like the one I just described are a reason why many women don't want to enter politics. They don't want to open themselves to the possibility of being demeaned or the center of a cascading rumor. I get it. Who does? Another strong advantage women have is a sense of compromise. Traditionally, men have used confrontational methods that often result in win-lose or no-win situations. I found women generally to be more adept at refusing to negotiate this way. Instead, they focus on the bottom line, where there are no winners or losers, only people who get something, a part of what they want. Women also tend to be good facilitators. We get people talking and help them move closer to each other's point of view. We also have more patience, which is sometimes very necessary in the long process of negotiations. Now, one of the most problematic decisions I ever made was one where negotiations broke down. It was my ascension to become the first freeholder director, woman director. This was a situation, and a lot of public figures find themselves in this at least once in their life, where you can either stand on principle and face the consequences, or stay in the fold and do as you're told. It's a dilemma that a lot of people have faced. So I saw this issue, which I will tell you about, as one of being a woman being denied to move ahead because she was a woman. And I took a firm stand, which had consequences. So in 1979, I was starting my second year of a 3-year term on the Board of Freeholders. At that time, I was made the vice chair of the board and told by our party chair that I would follow the established tradition of becoming chairman the following year, which would make me the first woman to serve in that position. However, when 1979 drew to a close, the party chair called a meeting with me and my 2 running mates and said a decision had been made giving the upcoming chairmanship to one of my running mates because, quote, he was the weakest of the 3 of us. My 2 colleagues nodded their assent, and I was dumbfounded. I didn't believe for one moment that his reason had validity, but rather he may have felt he might not be able to control me if I was made chair. So after the meeting, I wrote him a letter, and I asked him to convene a meeting of all the Democratic freeholders on the board to discuss the matter. He refused. So I then contacted the newspapers with an announcement that I planned to be the new chairman on Reorganization Day. I felt that this might precipitate a meeting between the chairman and me, but I was wrong. He was steadfast and silent. Now, some of you may know that Reorganization Day in the county is a ceremonial day. People come very happy, dressed up. New freeholders are installed. There's an election for a chair and a vice chair. This year, Union County had been for many years a swing county. So one year it would be Republican plurality, another year Democratic. In this time, it was 5 Democrats on the board and 4 Republicans. So when it came to time to elect a chair, the Dems nominated my weak colleague, and a vote was taken. The 4 Republicans voted no, the 4 Democrats voted yes, and I abstained. It was a deadlock, and you could have heard a pin drop in a room with over 100 people in it. This type of conflict was not supposed to occur at a ceremonial reorg, and you can imagine the buzzing and conversations. I did explain my vote by saying only it was a matter of conscience, and I hoped that the matter would be resolved quickly. Inside, I was certainly a bundle of nerves. So then I wrote a letter to all the municipal chairs requesting their help to resolve the dispute, since the party chair would not provide any information. They too believed there was no reason to keep me from being chair, but they did believe in party discipline. Now, this whole thing was complicated by 2 factors. One was that my husband at the time had been the unsuccessful candidate against the present county chair for that position. So some people thought this was my way of getting back at the chairman. And in truth, nothing could be farther from the truth, because my husband urged me, along with the party, to vote for a compromise candidate. The other complicating factor was that although a temporary chair was elected to the board, the absence of an official chairman stymied government in that no one could sign the official documents. So it was important to get some movement on this. At the next meeting, my colleagues again nominated my weak colleague. The Republicans nominated one of their own, and I again abstained. It was a nerve-wracking time. I was criticized publicly by my colleagues as well as others. I decided if the Democrats would not negotiate with me, I would negotiate with the Republicans. I approached one to discuss the possibility of their nominating me to break the deadlock, and I knew the consequences of asking them. It meant political blackballing for me, but at this point I was committed to a principle. The Republicans agreed, asking that I give them consideration on subcommittee choices. This was not a big ask because subcommittees were composed of 3 members, and the Dems could still retain their control. 25 days after the reorg and after 4 disappointing deadlock votes for chairman, I accepted the Republican nomination and voted with them to become chairman. There was lots of name-calling. Turncoat was one of the favorites. I was told I would never run for elective office again. I received the silent treatment from some of my colleagues, and yet I did have a productive year as chair. And although my term was up at the end of the year, my future at that point was dictated by the arrival of a new child in my family. But my political career was not over. Within 6 months of the conclusion of my term, I was appointed to a sub-cabinet position by Governor Byrne, and within the next 3 years, I was again a candidate for office, which I won. So people ask me, would I do this again? Absolutely, I would, because it was a promise and there was no reason not to have the chairmanship. And to me, it was a matter of honor and principle. But the sweetest outcome was yet to come 25 years later, when one of those running mates came to me and apologized to me for agreeing to vote for my weak colleague and not me. He said, quote, "It was a mistake. You deserved the chair. They almost got away with it because they didn't think you'd fight back." I appreciated his candor. Lastly, why is it important for women to be part of the political process? Well, women certainly bring a different perspective to public service than men. In their roles as women, perhaps in their field of work or profession, or as a wife, mother, caregiver, and in other roles, they have a unique viewpoint that adds content and substance to public sector programs and issues. Most importantly, representative government demands that all stakeholders be heard, something that does not occur without an effort to include a diversity of voices. To accomplish that, we need to have more women in office and in positions of leadership at all levels of government. Women also have a better record of moral and ethical behavior than their male counterparts. Now, granted, this trend may relate to the smaller number of women involved, but for the present, women's record for ethical behavior runs circles around some men who have literally been caught with their pants down. I'd like to end with a quote from a New Jersey woman who fought her own battles for equality in her chosen field of the law. Mary Philbrick was the first woman attorney and the first to be admitted to the bar in New Jersey. Initially, the New Jersey Supreme Court refused her petition to be admitted to the bar, based on the grounds that no other woman in the state had ever sought admission. She didn't take that answer, instead lobbying the New Jersey legislature for a law to admit women, and was finally admitted in 1895. During her career, she used her position to advance women's rights, work in the social settlement movement, and advance a gender-free New Jersey Constitution when it was rewritten in 1947. Philbrick believed that the best governance included both men and women. Here's what she wrote, quote, "Place them, men and women, on the same footing, and by thus establishing their equality, both men and women will be better able to work intelligently in the business and professional worlds." End of quote. It's been a pleasure to speak with you tonight about women in politics. You've been a great audience. I didn't see anyone fall asleep. Thank you so much.
Unless it gets too hard, I'll do it for you, but.
The gentleman in the blue shirt.
I know you've published a couple of history books in the last several years, and I believe you're working on another one. But I'm just wondering if this, the book, Women in Government, if you should maybe revise that and have it reprinted again? I mean, because it seems like it's still something that would be valuable today.
That's a good thought, and that's a good suggestion. I certainly could. Once I finish the book I'm now writing. Thank you. No question. Yes.
Can I have another question?
Okay.
I'm just wondering, I mean, I know there's a few states that have public funding for candidates running for office, as opposed to, you know, like you said, you have to spend a lot of time, you know, having events, raising money, getting support and such. And I really haven't looked into if it really works in these other states, but do you have any idea? Do you think that might be a good idea? You know, like each party gets X number of dollars to run the campaigns. Whoever runs the better campaign, you know, wins.
Yeah, there's usually a limit to how much they can get, yes, but sometimes it's a shared amount. They raise amount, and then there's a amount given to them. It would help, maybe it would encourage more people to run that, you know, hadn't thought about it and being stopped by the issue of having to run, you know, raise money. That's a big ask. You know, you wind up asking people you don't even know for money. That's a hard thing to do. And it might work. We would do it for presidential candidates nationally, right? Yes.
You say it costs a lot of money to run a campaign, and I know it does. Could you sort of detail for us where the bulk of the money goes, or, split so much to airtime, TV time, paper time?
So it depends, of course, on where you're running and what office you're running for. State office is certainly different than county or local office. But let's say you're running for a position in a town, and you have a town newspaper. You might want to take advertisements in it. You want to certainly do literature. The new thing, of course, is new thing. It's not new. Media, social media. So there are all types of programs that are out there for candidates using not only Facebook but Instagram and Twitter and getting the message across. It takes a lot to get your message across. The first time I ran for local government, I was a sacrificial lamb. It was a three-way race. And they nominated me because there wasn't a chance for anyone really to win. I was running against an incumbent and another woman. And we didn't have, of course, Facebook or Instagram or cell phones or anything of that sort in the 70s. So I walked, and I walked to every house in my town, and that was Springfield. I walked in high heels because women then wore high heels, and I wore out about 6 pairs of shoes. But direct contact with people is really the way to campaign. If you can talk to people and you can find out their concerns, then you can address them. And they get to meet you, and they see that you're not crazy, not too crazy anyway. So it's a good way to meet, but it depends on the office. Nowadays, a lot of money is spent in advertising, a lot, and through direct mail. Mail's very expensive, as are brochures. So, yes.
Would you say the majority of your supporters that work with you, are they all volunteers, or do you have paid people to work on your staff?
Well, in my case, I run for county office, and usually I'm a nominee of the party. So the party, I'm expected to raise money, but the party also raises money. And they sort of put it in a pool, and it's used, and they decide where it's best used. Yes?
Could you give a couple of specific examples of when you knock on somebody's door or you meet them on the street, how do you approach them? How do you engage them?
You say hello. You say hello, you introduce yourself. You never go in the house, because if you go in the house, then you're losing time. So you shake their hand, they'll shake your hand, you introduce yourself, tell them you're running. Tip O'Neill had a famous story. He lost an election in Boston, and he couldn't imagine how he would possibly lose an election. And he went out the next day, and he met his neighbor, and Mrs. O'Brien said, "I'm sorry that you lost." He said, "Yes, it's terrible. I don't know why." She said, "Well, you didn't ask for my vote." All politics is local. You really have to ask people, introduce yourself, and ask them to support you. And find out what their concerns are. It may be a park down the street. It may be traffic. You don't know. But you want to know because you want to be familiar with the issues in that town if you're going to represent people. Yes?
You mentioned the PAM organization. Now, is that like for women who are a little bit more established but just need money to be raised? Or are there any initiatives like to maybe get women who are in college age or even high school to be sort of interested in the whole political process?
Well, Pam's list was more or less dedicated to state legislators, people running for the state legislature. Let me tell you how it came about. It's a very interesting story. I was helping Bill Clinton when he ran for president, and I got a very prestigious position on the New Jersey Finance Committee. I mean, that's high up. It was all men, except for me and one other woman. So they called a meeting at a restaurant in a faraway place, a very dark restaurant, I remember. And I went in, and the other woman was sitting there in sort of a lobby area, and I saw one or two men come in, and they disappeared. So after now the meeting was supposed to start at 7, and after about 15 minutes, I said to my friend Betty, I said, Betty, there's a meeting going on, and we're not in it. Let's go. We went in, and that was the finance meeting. So after Clinton got elected, there were many of us that worked in that election that said, we need to support women. How can we best support women? So we decided to take the women that were either interested, maybe they were mayors of large cities, they wanted to run for the state legislature. We were going to support those women. So that's how it started, power and money. Yes.
Could you just tell us something about your position as clerk of Union County? What are your responsibilities? Elections.
I do lots of different things. Actually, I have 3 divisions. As you know, I have a satellite office here in Westfield. My main office is in Elizabeth. I have a recording division, recording all property documents, deeds, mortgages, liens, UCCs. There's about 20 different land records. From that recording of those land records, we make millions and millions of dollars of funds for the county, which goes back into the county's general fund. And the state also gets a portion out of the realty transfer tax, because anytime property is transferred from one person to another, there's a tax. So that's a big part of my office. And we're very concerned about that, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We also have a passport office, and that's an issue now because passports are so delayed, applications. It's taking months to get a passport. And the third thing we do is we do not provide the machines or the poll workers, but we do elections in the sense that we design the ballot that goes in the machine. We design the absentee ballot, overseas ballots, provisional ballots, emergency ballots, all different. And we tabulate those on election night. We also, and there's several elections. It's not just the primary and the general. There's school boards, and of course Westfield just had a school board election. So it's now become, because of the laws that have been passed regarding elections, it's become almost a year-round job. In terms of property, I will tell you this. There is a movement in the United States for con men or women to steal your property. We haven't had too much of it in New Jersey, although we did have an instance a few weeks ago in my office and one a few years prior to that. People come in with a deed, and it looks absolutely legitimate. There's no way I can deny it being recorded because it meets all the requirements of the law. And what they're doing is they're transferring property that is not theirs to them. It happened a few years ago with a caregiver who was taking care of an elderly woman in Hillside. She came in with a document transferring this woman's property, who she was working for, to her. But my staff caught on, and we contacted the prosecutor's office, and she was caught. But lately, a gentleman in Westfield stole someone's identity and then decided that he was going to sell that person's house. The realtor caught it. But I do have a program, just if you own property, it's a free program. It's called Fraud Alert. And what it does is you register by phone or email, and anytime a property is recorded with a name like yours or your name, you get a notification. So this is after the fact, but it happens very close to the conveyance, and you can then go to your police department and file a complaint. After you file the complaint, the report, you can go to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor will follow up on it. Doesn't happen often here, but other states like New York, it happens very frequently. So you should be on the outlook for it. Yes?
So how old were you when you suddenly decided? that
10
you-
years old, Gordon. 10 years old.
That was the question.
Yeah, I've been in I started very young. I ran for the Board of Education in my early 20s. Long time. Yes,
What book are you writing now?
20th Century Women. I've written two historical nonfiction books. One is about the Civil War, my great-grandfather who wrote letters to his family from the Civil War, but it's not taken from that perspective. It's taken from the perspective of what was happening at home when the men were fighting. And the second book followed that, and it's called Northern Women, and that's about what happened to the women after the war, and this book is 20th Century Women. Thanks for asking. Yes?
I have a question, backtracking to them discovering that this person tried to, or they had stolen somebody's identity and tried to, I was just curious, how did they catch him? How did they?
Oh, the realtor, I think, suspected something. You know, it's like the woman that came in, the caregiver. People get nervous, you know, and I guess the realtor thought that this person really didn't own the house. But it's scary, because your house is your largest asset usually, right? Yes.
You mentioned that passports are being delayed in processing. Is that
Yes.
because the volume of passports?
Well, this is what happened. During the pandemic, there was only one passport office in the country, a facility that was open. There are over 27 of them in Hawaii, New Hampshire, Tennessee, all over the country. And there was a big delay. And then when the pandemic calmed down, passport offices opened, and they got rid of that backlog, supposedly. But now people feel more comfortable traveling, so there was a wave of new people coming in to either renew their passports or get passports for the first time, and that's what's clogging up the system. So a regular passport now takes about 10 weeks, 11 weeks, and an expedited passport, which you pay more for, takes 7 or 8 weeks. And if you're thinking of traveling, you have to make sure that your passport has at least 6 months on it before it expires, because countries demand that. We don't demand that, but other countries demand it. Okay. Yes.
So Joanne, you gave up your newspaper career, but how did it impact what you do after that, what you did after that? You gave it up, right?
Well, not really. This is what happened. You know, I was very active in the union, in the guild. Newark Evening News formed a guild. And I was their poster girl because my father was so active in the unions. And I was laid off at first. So what I did was I went to Europe, and I tried to be a freelance writer in Europe. That was an experience also. And then I was called back, because when they went back, they called back. But what happened was the paper was sold. They wanted, Media General wanted the paper because they had the first recycling paper plant in the United States. So I think newspaper writing affected me 2 ways. I was working with a lot of men, all men, and I learned how to handle myself better, but I also learned how to write very succinctly and very quickly and very concisely, which is a great, great asset, as you know, Tina. You know, I write a press release still in 5-10 minutes. You know, who, what, where, when, why, how. You know, so it was good. It was good experience. Also, I learned how to unearth things. You know, I can find almost anything. And I learned important lessons, too. I remember once I wrote an obituary about someone, because that's where you start writing obituaries. And I wrote in the obituary something saying the lady was, and my editor said, "Now, how do you know she was a lady?" So it was interesting. It was fun. Yes?
I'm struck by how much of your life you were the only woman or one of few. Was it hard to hang on to your sense of self as you're trying to deal with men who might act differently than you normally would, or
No,
a room full of women
no.
would?
No, I'm a very independent person. I have a mind of my own, as my staff knows. I can be stubborn. I'll say that word, but I also believe in principle. You know, I know who I am. I've always known who I am. But I think that relates to how you're brought up and where you go to school. I went to an all-girls school. So it was different. I mean, we didn't compete with men. You know, I was on the debate team. I was the captain of the debate team. We could do things that women or young girls might not feel comfortable doing in a school with boys. There was no competition. So it was different. And the same thing relates to women's colleges. The data's there. You know, women that go to women's colleges have a better sense of self and often go into non-traditional roles. I was very lucky. I had a first-generation Italian father who had no problem, had no problem saying to my sister, you want to go to law school, go to law school, you know? That's unusual. That was unusual in the 1960s. She was one of 2 women at the time in law school. What was worse was college, because she went to Northeastern University in Boston, and her major was economics. And of the graduating class, she was one of 2 women with that major. And she said the discrimination was horrible for the professors. Horrible. Not in law school so much, but in college. So, but no, sometimes I make bad choices, I think, but I always know that there are consequences. And in my book, the one thing I wanted women to learn, it's very important, is ethical, creative thinking, which means before you make a choice, look at all the consequences of all the possible choices you could make, all the options. And I use as an example Route 78. Some of you remember that there was a stretch of Route 78 that for years wasn't completed, right? It was like a 12 or 20-mile stretch. And it was up to the freeholders at the time, which I was one, to decide what happened with that. The federal government was very insistent that it be completed because it was stagnating. And it happened to be in the middle of that stretch of land was Watchung Reservation, right? So I really thought about it, and I said, there's got to be an option. So I said to them, I'm not in favor of completing it unless the federal government comes back and gives us some options like cut and covers. Why can't they do cut and covers under the reservation? Well, they said, a cut and cover costs $1 million. So, okay. So what they did was they came back and they offered the freeholders a state-of-the-art horse stables, and they did it. I voted against it because it wasn't right. It wasn't. You have to learn to listen to everyone, and you may not get the best choice option, but you have to take the one that has less harm to it. And I thought doing a cut and cover was a good choice. Expensive, but good at the time. $1 million is nothing now, but at the time it was expensive.
What does that mean, cut and cover?
A cut and cover means that here's the land and you go under. You have a tunnel that goes under. Have you ever been to Washington, D.C.? That's what they do, right? On all those circles, DuPont circles and others, they go under them. So going under the reservation wouldn't have upset the reservation, the trails, the way the animals migrate. It was a way to preserve the reservation, but they didn't do it. Their choice. Yes, Gary?
Yeah, overall, you talked about how when you first got into politics to now, there are more women involved, maybe not quite where it's supposed to be. And if we knew over the last so many years, progress for women in parts of the country seems to have stalled, if not gone backwards. But are you still optimistic for the future that, hey, things are going to get better for women in politics and overall?
women and men are not anxious to enter the political arena. Why? Because what's being normalized now. I mean, there was always name calling. There was always gossip. There was always rumors, but it's much, much worse. And when you have people coming into your office with a metal bat and hitting your staff and destroying your equipment, I mean, we had a gentleman, he's not a gentleman, I had a man last year who told me he was going to bring an assault rifle into my office. He was denied being on the ballot, so he blamed me. I mean, people are more aggressive and more violent now than they've ever been. So it's hard to get people interested in politics. It really is. I was stupid when I didn't know what it was like. I mean, my mother kept saying, "You don't want to do that." She knew. But it's a difficult field to go into. I hope more women go into it. We need more voices. Well, you've been a great audience. Thank you so much.
Great, I want to spend another hour just chatting with you. But we have 3 minutes, so I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Joanne has some books. So the one that she talked about, you can get it, what did you say, on Amazon for like $100? Or you can buy one.
You can buy a used one. You can
Yeah,
buy a
used one.
Much cheaper.
So she
I
has
have
some
two.
books. Okay, so wanted to let you know that. I also just wanted to pay attention to the committee that puts this together, because I get the privilege of standing up here and introducing the speaker, but Linnea is the chair, Mary Orlando's on the committee, Tina Lesher is on the committee, is Ellie Albertson here? Okay, Ellie Albertson and Sherry Cronin are both on the committee. So a lot of hard work goes into it, and Jen, who's behind the screen, is our key library support, and of course all the Friends people and Alan who spoke first this year. So I wanted to just let you guys know who are the workers behind these talks. And also to let you know that the summer is going to be starting soon, but in the fall we have Joe Vasili, who was on Wall Street, so but he's now an NCAA Division I women's basketball referee. And his talk, is this you who put this together? Because you're always creative with the titles. From the trading floor to the college hardwoods.
Actually, it was Joe's idea.
That was just idea. Okay, so he's talking September 20th, so you can look for that. And then Jay Hershey, who is an editor at the Wall Street Journal, is going to talk about a career in news, thrills, chills, and ink spills. So we have two great speakers coming to finish up the year after the summer. So hope to see many